member of Smart Speakers since the club's formation 3 years ago. She has won multiple evaluation contests and trained other contest-winning Toastmasters on evaluating. Today she's going to educate us on evaluating so that even brand new Toastmasters, like we have quite a few, can evaluate easily and effectively and grow their own speaking skills from evaluating. So before calling upon Amy, I will call upon Chris to kind of explain what the speech is going to be about.
Do you want to tell us why we do evaluations or educationals?
Sure. All right. One of the things about Toastmasters is this is an educational club. We're all here to learn. And there's a number of ways we can learn. One is by giving speeches or getting up during table topics when it's sort of a practical learning, getting up there and speaking. But sometimes it helps to have some guideposts more than watching and trying to follow. And educationals are a way that Toastmasters International provides us a way with providing those guideposts. There's a number of series, and this is from the Effective Communicator series or Speaking series?
Good question.
Successful
Club
This is actually from the Successful Club series. So that one surrounds how to have really great meetings, and evaluations are part of a really good meeting. If you have a diatribe-free set of evaluations that boost the speaker up and get them ready to do their next speech, then we're going to be more effective as a learning club and more effective actually in our daily roles. So I have all these criteria for an educational, and I'll spare you those. I think it'd be better to set up why we're doing this.
Thank you.
Amy.
Okay, so without further ado, we'll call Amy Pratt to embark upon us the knowledge she has on evaluating. Amy Pratt.
I have a million papers, so I'm going to give you yours so they don't get all mixed in with mine. So, fellow Toastmasters, today I'm going to be giving an educational on evaluations. I've called it Easy, Effective Evaluations because even if you've never given an evaluation before, your evaluation can still be easy and effective. Now, this is, like Chris said, from the Successful Club series. And the original presentation was called Evaluate to Motivate. Now, I've actually given this educational, this is probably about the third time now, but I strive each time I give it to impart a little bit more of my knowledge and learning that I've picked up along my Toastmasters journey so that it can be more effective and more motivating to you guys to get up and start giving really great evaluations as well. So, why do we evaluate? Well, we evaluate to build our evaluation skills, obviously. We also evaluate to build our own speaking skills, because when you're evaluating somebody, you're still learning about speaking. We learn from each other, so you listening to evaluations, you're going to learn from that, even if you're not the speaker. To provide immediate encouragement and feedback to the speaker, and to offer tips for improvement to the speaker. And as you can see, regardless of whether or not you're a speaker, you're the evaluator, or you're just the audience, everybody's going to learn and improve from an evaluation. And that's why it's such an essential part of the Toastmasters program. So today in my educational, I'm going to cover 3 areas. I'm going to talk about preparing for your evaluations. I'm going to talk about evaluating based on speech objectives, which is something that I found extremely, extremely valuable both as a speaker and an evaluator. And I'm going to talk about how to craft your evaluation, how to actually get down and get your evaluation prepared so that it's effective and easy to do for you. So preparing for an evaluation, as I mentioned, one of the most important things that we want to do as an evaluator is to evaluate on technique and instead of content. So regardless of what somebody's speaking of, whether it's a subject you're really familiar with, like how to toast a piece of toast, or if it's something you don't know anything about, like how to code a website, you're still going to be able to give them an effective evaluation because you're not going to talk about what they're talking about, but rather how they're speaking and how they're using speech techniques to speak effectively. Knowing your speaker and knowing the speech that they're giving is the number one thing that you want to do when you're preparing for a speech. So you want to find out what their manual objectives are. You want to consider their skill level because how you approach a beginning speaker is going to be really, really different to how you approach somebody who's been speaking for a long time. And you want to become familiar with the speech techniques that speaker is going to be learning in the speech yourself. Because if you don't know what they're supposed to be learning, you're not going to be able to tell them whether or not they learned it. Now, the Competent Communicator Manual, which is this lovely manual right here, it's a lot more than just a set of goals that you need to do and check off in Toastmasters. The Competent Communicator Manual is actually a learning plan, just like any teacher would make in any subject. And it's designed to help us as new speakers learn the building blocks of effective speaking. So each one of the 10 assignments in the Competent Communicator Manual can be refined down really simply into a speaking technique that we're going to learn by doing that particular speech. Starts out really easy by starting to speak. Then we move on to how to craft a speech outline, how to make our speech have a purpose, making good word choices in our speech, including body movement, including vocal variety, researching whatever we happen to be speaking on, using visual aids effectively, such as PowerPoint presentations or physical things, persuading our audience, and finally, making an impact with your speech or being inspiring with your speech. So when you get an assignment to do an evaluation, or when you sign up to do an evaluation, which I highly encourage you all to do because it's a really great learning experience, the first thing I recommend is find out what speech your speaker is giving and read the manual. Maybe you haven't done the speech yourself yet. Maybe you did it half a year ago. Maybe you did it last week. If you go back and read the manual objectives, it's still going to refresh you and remind you on how you're supposed to be learning, or how the speaker is supposed to be learning, and what they're supposed to be learning in this particular speech. Once you've read the manual, if you want to go a little bit more in depth and teach yourself more about the objectives of that speech, go online. Toastmasters, one of the great things about Toastmasters being an international organization is there's like hundreds of thousands and maybe even millions of us. There's a lot of people doing Toastmasters, and there's a lot of people who are in different places on their journeys and want to share the things that they've learned with other people. One of the sites that I really, really love and highly recommend using if you ever want to find out more about speaking skills is a site called 6 Minutes. It's actually run by a Canadian Toastmaster, and again, he's won multiple awards in different speech contests. And he actually has articles on pretty much every one of the first 10 speeches, and how you can, different things you can think about when you're looking at the speech, preparing it or evaluating it, how to be effective with that particular speech. The third thing that I highly recommend, even if you're not going to go really deep in depth and research your speech technique online, I highly recommend you get yourself some kind of an evaluation form. Again, there's tons of them online. I'm going to send around actually a copy of the ones that I use, so you can feel free to use them if you want. We actually have a couple on our Toastmasters SharePoint under this great folder called Reading Tools, where it has just a bunch of different forms that can help you out with different roles. Angela also threw up a checklist, handy evaluation checklist, so that's another one that you can take a look at if you like the idea of checking some ticky boxes before you make your evaluation. But I'm going to specifically talk about mine just because this is the one that I found to be most effective for me. Again, feel free to take a look online at different evaluation forms that people have made up, and take them or adapt them to your own needs. Just find something that you're comfortable. The main idea of having an evaluation form to use is that it's going to help you, first of all, organize your thoughts, and second of all, it's going to give you a place to write down your speech observations in a kind of orderly fashion so that you can pair what you're listening to the speech techniques that you want to review on. And I forgot my water, so pardon me for 1 minute. So with evaluations, when we're evaluating somebody, we really want to evaluate on the objectives of their speech first and foremost. You can't learn to run before you can walk. And basically that means that you don't want to go into somebody who's doing speech too and talk about whether or not they were persuasive with their speech. That's way ahead of the learning curve. It's kind of like taking a kindergartner and trying to tell them that they can't do calculus very well. Of course they can't do calculus. They don't even know how to add and subtract yet. And when I first started thinking about evaluating based on your speech objectives, actually came when I was doing my competent communicator about 3 years ago. I'd given myself a very exciting goal of finishing all 10 speeches in 1 year so that the club could get some points, and we'd look really impressive. And I had agreed to be a test speaker for an area evaluation contest, and I highly recommend this, by the way. And in an evaluation contest, the evaluators don't know what speech you're giving, so they're just trying to give you the best evaluation they can. And I'd given my book to our club mentor, a really great woman named Val Erickson, who was going to actually give me a paper evaluation so that it would count towards my goals. And she said, I'm going to evaluate you just based on your speech objectives. And she explained again what I just did, that you don't want to evaluate somebody on something they haven't reached yet. And you want to talk about their speech objectives because that's what they're trying to learn and that's how they're going to get the most value out of it. And I was like, wow, that's really great. So my speech on researching my topic, I had great evaluations on it. But she was the one that actually gave me the most valuable one because she knew what I was trying to accomplish with my speech, and she took the time to comment on whether or not I'd researched effectively and how I can research more effectively. So I'm going to talk, I'm going to give some examples here. We're going to talk about speech number 5, or your body speaks. The objectives for the speech are to use stance, movement, gestures, facial expressions, eye contact to express your message and achieve your speech purpose, and to make your body language smooth and natural. And again, if this was the speech you were going to be evaluating, you'd go and you'd read the manual on speech number 5. Maybe you'd take a look online, as I showed you with this particular website. And you'd take a look at your evaluation form and you'd say, what on my form applies most to this speech? Because that's the area of your form you're going to want to concentrate most on. I have a copy of a form here. I don't often keep my forms, but thankfully I had this sitting around in my mess, that I filled out for somebody who was giving an interpretive reading oratorical speech. And you can see that right away I crossed off this area about structure because they're giving a speech that was written by somebody else. So I'm not going to tell them your structure was horrible because they didn't write the structure. However, because the focus for the oratorical speech was on delivering it in an effective fashion, I noted to myself that I needed to focus on delivery, voice, physical, and I also asked the speaker, is there anything you're wanting to improve that you want me to watch specifically for? And she noted voice, so I specifically highlighted that. Now, I can talk about impact because she's made the conscious decision to choose for her oratorical speech for this club, so I can talk about whether or not that was a good choice and how she made it relate to us. I can talk about content a little bit because, again, she made that choice, but it's going to be primarily on delivery because that's the objective of her speech. So let's move on to crafting your evaluation. You've prepared, you've learned as much about these speech objectives as you can. Now you're in the meeting, you're ready to listen to this great speech and write an evaluation that's really, really great. First of all, I recommend picking an evaluation method. Sandwich method is a really great one to fall back on because regardless of the method you choose, you really want to make sure that somewhere in your feedback you're giving them at least 2 points of praise and at least 1 suggestion on improvement. I say a suggestion for improvement rather than a criticism because you can give somebody suggestions for improvement regardless of how good or bad they are. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. You're going to write down a lot during the speech. You're going to write down examples of things that they did really well, specific body gestures or times that they lowered their voice really low for impact. But in the end, you want to just pick the 2 to 3 positive things that you think were most strong. If you can relate them to the speech objectives, that's what I highly recommend. So, if there was a point in their Your Body Speaks where they leaned forward and they gripped the lectern and it made them seem really intense, talk about that as a great example of something they did really well. Again, and choose 1 piece for improvement again so that you're focusing on 1 thing specifically that they can take away and apply to their next speech. trying to do more than one piece of improvement or more than 2 or 3 points of excellence, you end up spending too much time talking about too many things, and you're not going to have a lot of impact. Whereas if you pick, your 2 best, strongest things, you're going to be able to expand on them quite a bit, and your speaker is going to come away with a lot more detailed, specific feedback for you. This is some examples of being specific for a suggestion for improvement, and this is something I got online that I really love because it kind of displays really effectively how being specific and using examples and explaining why can help your evaluation go from down here to up here. So you could give a point for improvement, you could say your gestures were really poor, but that doesn't really help them improve. Now, gestures were limited in the first half of the speech is a little bit more specific because they know that, even if in the second half of the speech they have a lot of wild gestures, the first one they were too close, but it still doesn't tell them how they're going to improve. You can tell them gestures were limited in the first half of the speech because you gripped the rhodium too much, and that tells them a little bit more specifically what they did wrong. But it's best if you can tell them how to take what they did wrong and do it better, such as by removing your hands from the lectern, you're going to make more easy, natural gestures. It's also worded a little bit more positively. Instead of saying you were bad by gripping the lectern, it's saying you could do better by letting go of it, and then you can make these more natural gestures. Now, what if my speaker doesn't do anything wrong? What if my speaker has really great body movement throughout their whole speech, and I can't think of anything that they did wrong to talk about? First of all, like I mentioned, even if you're a great speaker, you can always do better. I've had a lot of people specifically in this club say that they feel really daunted when they try and evaluate me because I have so much experience. And we do have a number of speakers that are really, really excellent speakers. And the key to that is not to look for anything bad, but to think what can make this even more effective. So maybe I talked about going on a journey, and maybe I went for a walk, and maybe I moved across the stage, and maybe I did that once, but maybe I could have done it again later on when I talked about that story again. Maybe that's a suggestion that you can give them. Secondly, you can always evaluate backwards. So even if they had really good body movement, we can go back to the earlier speech goals, such as speech outline or speech point, and we can talk about those. I often will talk about speech number 3, or get to the point. And not a lot of people in their intros give that really firm defining statement like, today I'm going to teach you to evaluate easily and effectively. And that's something you can tell anybody who's at speech 3 or more, regardless of where they are on their speech journey. It's still going to be effective evaluation because that's something they should have learned already. And finally, just as I mentioned in this point up here, just think about what you find effective in your own and other speeches and share that with that person. Maybe there's somebody in the club who has really, really great vocal variety and they do something specifically, and that could be something that your speaker could learn from. You can feel free to give a point of improvement based on that. Points of praise, same kind of thing. We want to be specific, and I'm not going to go through all of these examples except for the last one. So rather than just saying, I loved your funny story, I'm going to say, when you talked about dyeing your dog green, it was a really great use of self-deprecating humor. And it was an effective way to connect with the audience. It made your statement about pet ownership really memorable and resonate with us. And it made your very factual speech less dry and more entertaining. So what I'm saying there is, even though they had really great content in their speech, I'm telling them why it was effective. I'm talking about the fact that it was humorous, it helped engage with us, it helped make their material more engaging, it helped connect with the audience, and that's kind of how we can step away from just saying, I love the story about the dog, that was so funny, to going towards, this is why your dog story was the best thing about your speech. And you can kind of see in the form here, I've taken all of the notes that I made, and usually I make a lot more notes. For them, I've picked some strengths, I've picked the challenge, and I've picked what you can do best. And so that's kind of how I use my form specifically. So I'm going to summarize really quickly here because I'm running out of time. The last thing that you want to do in crafting a good evaluation is do a summary. Your summary is going to help your evaluator remember, or your speaker remember the two important things that you really loved, the one thing that they can do better. It's going to help them resonate. So regardless of the examples you gave, it's going to make it more memorable for them. And when you close your evaluation with a summary and end on, your last point of praise, it's going to end the speech on a positive note. And the most important thing about your evaluation is, even if you can't think of anything useful, just make the speaker feel good about themselves and make them want to come speak again. Because that's what we're all here for. We're here to encourage each other and help each other learn. So in summary, preparing, everybody basically can do a really easy, effective evaluation as long as you put in some preparation so you know what you're going to be evaluating on. You focus on evaluating on the speech objectives of the speech itself. And then you craft your evaluation using a method that is logical and kind of organizes your thoughts into it. I'd like to challenge you all to sign up for an evaluation in the next 2 months so that you can kind of start doing this. And if anyone would like to be mentored on evaluating, please feel free to send me a line. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy, for a wonderful speech on evaluations. I hope nobody uses diatribes in any further evaluations.